Hello and welcome to the Noble Desktop live stream. My name is Dan Rodney and I'm an instructor at Noble Desktop, and I've been a teacher here for over 20 years. Noble Desktop has been around for over 30 years, and I've been doing design and coding of web pages for over, I think it's actually almost 25 years now. I've used all sorts of design apps from back in the day, Image Ready, before Photoshop absorbed. It was kind of like the web version of Photoshop before those features were absorbed into Photoshop. I've used Illustrator, I've used Photoshop, I've used Macromedia Fireworks. So I've used all of these apps. I use Adobe XD and Figma and Sketch, so I'm familiar with all of these. Today we're going to be taking a look at Adobe XD, and I'm going to introduce you to it. A couple things. This presentation for the slides, this link is in the video description down below this YouTube video. So it's nobledesktop.com/presentation/intro-to-XD. But you can check out that link in the video description down below. And when you're in this slide deck here, you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard to switch between your slides. Or if you're on a touchscreen, you can swipe between the slides as well. And there'll be some links in here that will be useful for your reference. And then a good portion of the seminar will be live demonstrations. So let me just briefly go over here what we're going to be discussing today in this webinar. What is Adobe XD, what it can and can't do, and what the pricing of Adobe XD is. Is it free? Why not use Photoshop or Illustrator? Some people are already using Photoshop or Illustrator. Why not just continue to use those? And a good portion of the seminar today will be a high-level overview of actually using Adobe XD. So I'll walk you through setting up a document and going through the workflow of designing, prototyping, and then sharing your Adobe XD files. And then I'll come back and talk about a little bit about how Adobe XD compares to Figma and Sketch, which are similar apps that basically do the same type of thing as Adobe XD, but are made by other companies, and ways to learn more about Adobe XD. So that's what I'm going to be covering today. So what exactly is Adobe XD? And I'm going to just turn off my webcam now so we can concentrate on these slides here. Adobe XD is it's an all-around digital design tool. Adobe is not trying to limit this to just one type of design. It is meant to be a very well-rounded design tool for anything digital, whether it's user interfaces, user experience design, websites, apps. They do voice prototyping. Unlike a lot of the other competing apps, you can do voice interactions where you can ask it a question, it'll do something in response to that. So they are trying to be an all-around kind of future design program for kind of the modern age. XD does compete with Figma and Sketch, which are made by other companies. We teach all of these apps. We teach XD, Figma, and Sketch, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as how XD stacks up against those apps. But primarily today we're going to be taking a look at XD and focusing on it. So who is it for? It is for UX and UI and any sort of digital designer. If you are designing digital products, then Adobe XD is for you. XD is trying to be a single app where you can do everything in one app, from design to prototyping to sharing with developers or clients, having comments being made, integrating those comments back into your design, and going through the workflow of designing, prototyping, and then eventually handing it off to a developer to build. So that brings us to kind of what XD can and what it can't do. What it can do is design the look and feel of websites, apps, any sort of digital type product, and it can make working prototypes so that you can show clients and developers how that design should work, how it should animate, because you can actually do some animation in Adobe XD. What it can't do is and none of these apps can, Figma, Sketch, and Adobe XD, none of them are creating the final website or app. Those things must be coded by a developer. And this is a point of confusion for some people, they think that if they're making something that looks like an app or a website, and they're animating it and they're building prototypes where it kind of transitions from one screen to another, they think they get a final website or app out of these design apps, but they're not. These are for designing, not producing final things. The coding that is involved in creating a website or app is much more complex than design apps are going to be capable of producing. So none of these design apps are focusing on coding. They're for designers to use, and then there'll be a process after the design is built to give it to developers, and then they must actually code this to make it work. And when we're designing in Adobe XD, there are prototyping features, and they're quite good. We can do a lot of prototyping. But at the same time, you can't build every single type of interaction, especially kind of really complex interactions. So we do the best we can. We try to get things as close as possible to be as realistic as possible so that clients can understand what our vision is, what our idea is, and developers the same thing. You got to show a developer what you want in terms of visuals, but also interactions and going from screen to screen. But if there's animations, how does that stuff look? We do the best we can, but keep in mind that we are not building the final thing. So if Adobe XD or really any of these, design apps, they can't 100% produce something that's exactly like the final website or app. We can get close, and new versions of these apps keep improving how close we can get to a very realistic type thing, but we do the best we can, and anything else we would just have to explain to the client or the developer if we can't actually build that sort of interaction within Adobe XD. So, good question, is Adobe XD free? And there is actually a free plan. Now, if you go to the Adobe website and you just look at Adobe XD, you're probably going to see the free trial that they want you to sign up for. And this link that I still have here is a link to the free Adobe XD starter plan. And this is different than the free trial. So there is still a starter plan. I kind of think that Adobe doesn't want you to really get that free plan. I think they want you to, of course, well, I shouldn't say I think they want, of course they want you to pay for Adobe XD, but they do still have a starter plan, and it can do a good amount of stuff, but it can't do everything that the paid version of XD can do, of course. So the starter plan is their free version. It's different than the free trial. When you do the free trial, that's a fully functional, everything works version of Adobe XD. But then when the free trial is done, you'd have to pay to kind of unlock the full capabilities of it. I'm not actually sure, because I have a paid account with Adobe, I'm not actually sure what happens when that trial runs out. I don't know if that just becomes the starter plan for Adobe XD, where some features get locked and you can only do what's included with the starter plan. So I'm not actually sure in that case. So you'd have to test that out. But at least with this starter plan, you can do quite a bit. There are some limits. So what are those limits here? That you can do one active shared link. So I'm going to show you this later. Basically, you can make a shared link where you can send it to clients to get feedback. You can send it to a developer. You can only get one of those at a time. You could delete it and then create another one, but basically that means you can only be working on one project at a time. Also, in terms of collaborating with other people, you can only have one active shared document, and you can only work with 2 other people. So it had to be a very small team of people that you're working with, and you can only have one of those at a time. So they mean for this to be something you can try out Adobe XD, see if you like it. But if you're going to be actively using it, working with multiple people, working on multiple projects, you will have to step up to the paid plan. It's beyond a free trial because there's not a time limit on this, but the limitations do put up enough limitations that you're going to need to pay for it if you're serious about using Adobe XD. And things like linked libraries, where if you're working at a company and you want to use libraries across multiple documents, across shared users, so multiple people can share the same library, those publishing of those linked libraries, that's for the paid plans only. You also only get access to your basic font library. You don't get the full Creative Cloud fonts. You have to pay for those. So You can certainly get started with Adobe XD for free, whether it's the free trial or this free starter plan, and you can do some things. But if you're going to be seriously using XD, you will have to pay for it. And I just kind of reiterated those limitations here. But you can click that link to see the full list of limitations there. So is XD free? There is one, but if people are really going to seriously be using XD, you're going to need to pay for XD. And it's already included in the Creative Cloud. So if you have Creative Cloud already, you automatically get Adobe XD as part of your Creative Cloud. So why not use Photoshop or Illustrator? There's a lot of people for many years that have been using Photoshop and Illustrator to do design of various types. Why not use those? It's because they work well as a companion to Adobe XD, but on their own, they were not built for UX and UI and digital design. They were built for photo retouching and drawing, and they're good at those. We're going to use Photoshop to retouch photos. We're going to use Illustrator to draw complex vector graphics, and we can use those in our Adobe XD layouts. But those are great companion apps that go well with Adobe XD. Adobe XD is focused solely on UX and UI design and the whole workflow that goes around it in ways that Photoshop and Illustrator just can't do. So if you are using Photoshop and Illustrator to do that type of work right now, seriously consider Adobe XD, because it's going to have tons of features that you can't find in Photoshop and Illustrator. And you can actually open up Photoshop and Illustrator files in Adobe XD, and they will be converted into editable Adobe XD files. So they're trying to make it easy for people to switch. In fact, you can open up Sketch files in XD. You can open up Photoshop, Illustrator. You can't open Figma, although there's probably a converter to convert Figma into something like Sketch or XD, so you can probably run that through a converter. But XD basically says, hey, if you're using something else, come to us, trying to make it as easy as possible to switch into using Adobe XD. So enough talking about it. Let's see how this actually works. And I'm going to fire up XD here. All right, so this is looks to be like a welcome screen. In fact, they even say welcome, but this is not just an ordinary welcome screen. This is actually your new file dialog. If you were to ever kind of close this and say file new, it's just going to open that window back up again. So normally I don't bother with welcome screens, but this is not just your standard welcome screen. This is showing your different artboards that you can create. So you can choose, do you want to create a mobile or tablet, a desktop? Now they are a digital design app, so they're not just about websites and apps. They're also like, hey, you can create something for Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or a YouTube video. And so they have some different presets in there that you can choose from. So you can click the icon to create the file if you're okay with the preset that's already chosen. If you're not okay with that preset, let me go ahead and close that. Then you can click on the menu and then you can choose. Like by default, this was set to the iPhone 13, but maybe you want a smaller iPhone to design with, or maybe you want a tablet or something, like an iPad or something. You can choose that. This is just choosing your first artboard size. Once you've got your document created, you will be adding different artboard sizes. So this is purely just your initial first artboard. So, so let's say I choose to design for, like, let's say an iPhone 13 mini. And by the way, once you've chosen that, the next time you go to create a new file, that's going to be your preset. So that's kind of set that as like a default. So from now on, that's your default that you will be creating. Of course, you can still go into the menu and change it, but now when you click that icon, now it's creating something with that kind of preferred size that's like your default size that you want. The interface of Adobe XD is pretty minimal, especially compared to a lot of other Adobe apps. If you're used to Adobe apps where you have to do what I call is the Adobe panel shuffle, where you've got all these panels over here on the right and you're shuffling them around and moving them and rearranging them, none of that exists in XD. When you go into the window menu, there's no panels to open or close. You just have this panel over here on the right, which is always open, can't close it. It's always open there, this inspector on the right, and that's going to update depending on what you have selected. There are a couple panels over here on the left. There are three little icons down here on the bottom left of the screen. So you've got your plugins, you've got your layers, and you've got your libraries, that used to be called the assets panel. In fact, it's still called document assets up there. And that's for all the different things you can save into there, like styles and components and that sort of stuff. But in your layers panel, this is where you can see the artboards that you've created. So within a document, you create artboards to design on. This is my first artboard here. When I select it on the right-hand side, I can see the various sizes, the width and the height. I can see the fill color here. So if I want to change the fill color of the artboard, I can. And you can create as many artboards in your document as you want. So over here on the left, we've got our toolbar. And of course, you can create things like, rectangles and so forth on the artboard. Choose your fill color over here on the right. Choose a border color. Increase the size of that. Turn the border off if you don't want it. Delete things if you want to. You can use your select tool to click on things, move them around, delete them if you don't want them. But there's going to be an artboard tool over here that we can use to insert additional artboards. So if I choose the artboard tool, over here on the right, you'll notice that this inspector panel will change. Now, it depends on if you already had something selected as to what you're going to see here. Because if my selection tool has an artboard already selected, notice over here on the right, you see all the options for it. And at the bottom is just some empty space. But when I choose the artboard tool, notice how now I see the artboard presets down below here. So if you already have an artboard selected, you will see the settings for that artboard, and then the presets are added down below. If nothing's selected, so let's say I use my selection tool, I click off so that nothing's selected, then when you choose your artboard tool, nothing was selected. You don't need to see the options for it. So then they just show all of the presets without you having to scroll down just to start to see those presets. And they categorize them into mobile phones, tablets, and desktop and social media, equivalent to those different icons in the welcome screen. So if I want to do an iPad or something, I can click on iPad, and now I've got a phone and an iPad. And even though it's selected and I could change the size and change the appearance of it, I'm still in the artboard tool, so I can still choose another preset. Can come down here, click on a desktop size. Now, let's say you want to do something that's not listed here. Well, you could just start with it, and then it's selected. So then you can come up here, and let's say you want to do 1440, but that was not a preset that was built in. So I could just type in 1440 and customize that to my liking. I can go back to my selection tool here and double click on the name of the artboard. I can do that here in my canvas, or I can do that over here in the layers panel as well, whichever one is more convenient for you. Double click on it, give it a name like desktop, double click, tablet. You can hit tab to go to the next one so that you don't have to click on each one of those. And when you have something selected on a particular artboard, then you're just going to see that one artboard. There's an arrow that you can click to go back to the whole list of all the artboards, and it'll actually zoom out so that you can see all of your artboards. And that way, when you're looking at one particular artboard, you're not seeing all of the other artboards. You imagine if you have dozens of artboards, that would be a lot to see in your layers panel. So when you switch from one artboard to another, they'll tell you the name of the artboard up there at the top, and then you'll see all the various layers and stuff that you have in there. And if you don't have anything selected, then you'll see a list of all of your artboards that are there. They don't have scroll bars in the app, so you have to use your space bar to drag around, which is standard in pretty much every graphic design app. You just hold the space bar, drag around with your mouse to move around. Of course, you can use your scroll wheel on your mouse as well, or your trackpad. Zooming in and out is Command plus and minus on Mac, or Control plus and minus on Windows. Again, standard keyboard shortcuts that people are normally used to if you're used to other design apps. And so I want to delete some of these artboards. I want to go back to just having a phone here. So if I click on the name of an artboard, I can hit delete on my keyboard if I want to delete those artboards and get rid of those. So you can arrange these artboards in whatever arrangement you want. You can have as many or as few as you want within this kind of big canvas that you are designing. And so That's how you start to lay out your document. Now, I've got my artboard here. I want to start designing on it, so I want to zoom into that. They have a nice zoom to selection that's very easy to choose here. Zoom to selection, it zooms in there, whatever you have selected. And I want to start to design on here. I want to bring in some graphics. I've got a logo. I've got some photos that I want to bring in, so I can import those things. File, import. I can also drag and drop as well. And there's actually some advantages to dragging and dropping. And here I've got a logo. These SVG files are very standard on the web these days. Anytime you're going to an icon library or something and downloading files, they're typically an SVG file. Illustrator can save out SVG files or export SVG files. Don't actually use the old save as in Illustrator. You should be exporting as to get better quality SVG code, because behind the scenes SVG files are coded files. But SVG files basically work across all modern digital design apps. You can bring in other file types, like you can even copy and paste from Illustrator as well, but SVG is just a very common format. For example, if you go to something like Feather Icons, these are a bunch of icons that you can use in designs. Let's say there's a design that I want, and I'm going to click on that. Then it downloads an SVG file for you. So pretty much all the vector, the good quality vector things that you're going to find online, they're all going to be SVG standard format that we're using now for exchanging stuff. So let's go back here. This came in. Now this particular logo, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here, is there's a white and a black version of this, and it's a folder over here. I can open up the folder by clicking on the icon. Unlike a lot of apps that have a little disclosure triangle there, they save some space there, and you can click on that folder icon, just in case that wasn't obvious, that you can click on that to expand that. So you could do that, but a lot of these things aren't named, so you don't have to necessarily look in there, but it is a folder, it's a group, so when I drag it around, it moves all in one, but if I double click, I will go into that group, and I can start to select the things that are in it, and delete the parts of that I don't want, because this is a vector design program. So I can bring in vectors, keep them as vectors, I can edit them. So if I double click to go in there and select this background rectangle, I can change the fill color and make it whatever I want. I can scale this up. Now as I drag here, I'm going to hold shift to make sure that I scale it proportionally up or down, because I don't want to start stretching or distorting things. What you're actually seeing there is this thing called responsive resize, which is trying to adapt the layout. That could be useful for other things where you're actually changing the layout, but if you're just doing a vector graphic, hold shift so that when you scale up and down, it will do so proportionally. And I'll make about this big here, and I'm going to put it in the middle. You get nice little smart guides showing up for you, but you also do have the ability to use your alignment buttons over here at the top right panel, top right of the inspector panel over here. Again, Adobe normally has tons of different panels to hide and show, so you'd have to go in other apps like into the alignment panel, open that up, and then you'd have it, but everything's just going to be over here on the right hand side. Just look for the settings over here, and if your window is too short, you might have to scroll down to see additional options. But the alignment buttons are up here, so if you have one thing selected and I hit the top button, it would go to the top of the artboard. And if I hit the center button, it would go to the center of the artboard. If you have multiple items selected, let's say I option drag, or on Windows alt drag, if you have multiple things, then they would be aligning to each other. So they'd be aligning to the center of each other, not the artboard. But if you just have one thing, then it will go to the artboard. So I could put it on the left or the right or the middle. And it's a nice quick way of being able to align things to the artboard. But in this case, the smart guides also pop in and make that pretty easy to do as well. I want to also bring in a photo to put behind here. So I'm going to, again, import. Now, there's a couple ways to bring photos in, and importing is not always the best way to do it. So let's see why I say that. I'm going to open up and go to my photos, and I've got a location photo that I want to bring in of this place. And wow, that's just really big. Well, because it's a 5,000 pixel image. and my artboard is minute comparison. So this is just really huge. And yeah, I could zoom out really, really, really far and start to scale this down, because my artboard is a whopping 375 pixels because it's a mobile phone. But it's kind of unyieldy here to start scaling this just giant photo down. But you know, it's often common that you'll get some nice high quality original graphic, and you know, maybe on the desktops we need something really big. We technically don't need something this high res on a phone, although it's perfectly fine to bring it in. Eventually, if we were going to export the graphic from XD will cut the resolution down to what we actually need. But having to scale that down is just kind of tedious. So there's a much better way to bring things in my opinion, instead of just bringing it in using the import. The way that I typically am going to bring things in is by drag and drop. And I'm going to drag and drop it onto a box. I want to dictate in my layout about the area that I want the photo to take up. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool to draw a box over that area. And it doesn't matter what that box looks like. Like, it doesn't matter if there's a fill color or anything on that. That doesn't matter, but just make a box of whatever type, and then you can drag your photo into that box. So I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to drag and drop in. So I'm going to go to that same photo, location photos. Here we go. I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to aim at that box and see how it highlights it. Boom. And it automatically scales it to fit into that box. Way easier and definitely preferable. Now, a couple things about this. First of all, I want to put this below my logo, so I'm going to drag it down there in my layers panel. But I'm going to go back to my selection tool and I'm going to resize this. Notice what is happening, and I like the way that this gets resized. As I make it taller, I've got the entire height of the photo, but it can't fit the entire width. So as I shrink this down, I'm always getting the full height, and I'm getting as much width as possible. Now, at some point when I get too short here, now it's fitting the entire width, but it can't fit the entire height. So it's going to be cropping off either the left and the right or the top and the bottom. So it centers in on that photo by default. And we can, of course, customize that. But by default, it does this nice kind of responsive resizing with a centered alignment, which is actually very much mimicking a kind of web page style resize. So if you ever are reusing assets across different screen sizes, when you go to resize them from one screen size to another, this does help you to kind of get ballpark started as to where you want to go. Now, this might not be the exact cropping you want. So once you put it in here, you can double click and you can resize the photo, move it around. So if you don't want so much of that top part there, you can change all that stuff around. After you're done, it'll still kind of try to do that same resizing that you were doing before, but it's keeping your cropping. And to me, this is the best cropping experience, the best image manipulation experience across all of these apps: Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. This is just the easiest way to handle images. It just works really nicely. I vastly prefer it to the way that Sketch does it, as well as Figma. Figma is just a little bit clunkier. Sketch is the most tedious of all of them in just terms of bringing in images and cropping them. And what actually happens here is that it put that photo into this box, and it's different than if you bring an image in, because if I've got this photo here, look at the icon there. That's a little rectangle, right? If I import this, if I say to import, and I choose that same photo here, and let's scale it down here, down to like 360, and it's probably all the way over there. Let's put this at X0 and Y0 just to bring it in. There we go. Look at the layers panel over here. Notice the icon looks different. This looks like a little photo icon. That's the one that I used File, Import to bring in. And this image is going to work differently, the one that uses import. Not only is it more annoying to scale it down, but also it's not cropping. I can't crop this photo the way that it exists right now. So it does not have that container. It does not kind of proportionally scale to fit into something. You want to draw a rectangle and drag and drop it into that rectangle. There's not a menu command to directly place a photo into a box unless you've like already imported it. So the workflow that's the best way to bring images in is to draw your box, draw that box there, and drag and drop it from the desktop. Drag and drop it. That's going to be the best because it creates that box. That box is nice and easy to resize. Let me go back to my select tool to do that. And that works nice. You can still double click, you can still crop, and all of that stuff works really nicely. So that is the way to do images. Do not use the file import for pixel-based images. That's fine for doing vector-based stuff, but not for the pixel-based stuff. You want to put the pixel-based images into a box. So, and if you don't want that photo in the future, you can always go to your fill and just replace it with a fill color, and it gets rid of your photo that used to be in there because it's a rectangle filled with a photo. So let me undo that. Okay. So next up, I want to start to make multiple artboards here and link them up and start to build a prototype. I'm going to duplicate this artboard here. So I'm going to click on that artboard, and you can say duplicate. You can also say copy and paste as well, but duplicate will do that all in one step. Boom, now I got a duplicate. And I probably shouldn't be calling this phone. That's assuming I have like one screen. I should be giving these screen names. So I could call this homepage. Double click on this one. This could be the menu page. So this is for a restaurant. And I want to create a menu page over here. Now maybe for the home page, it's okay to have this nice big photo of the place. But maybe on a menu page, I would do something, you know, maybe where that gets a little smaller and more minimized and has the text that says where you are. Use my type tool, come over here, put my type there. I'm going to center my text and say this is the menu. And I'm going to go to my selection tool here. There's a nice little button here that you can use when you just click. I didn't drag, I just clicked. When you click, it creates a single line of text. You can hit return if you need another line, but assuming you don't hit return, this will be a single line of text. You don't have to worry about the size of this box. You just drag that little bottom handle and you can quickly size the text that's in there, which is nice. And that's just changing your font size over here. Now, when it comes to fonts, this is going to show you any font that you have installed on your computer. Always make sure that you have the license agreement that you need for your project, that if you're doing apps, that you have a license for app design. If you're doing a website, that you have a license for website design. But assuming that you have the proper license, this is going to be all the fonts you have installed on your computer. And so you can choose whatever font you want. And let's find something else here. Actually, I'm going to click into that font menu. I'm going to use my up and down arrow keys. Now, this is something that a lot of Adobe apps let you do, that you can click into a menu there and use your up and down arrow keys. And actually, I kind of, let's say that one. Kind of like that one. And then maybe not light, maybe black. All right, let's say I want that. And then my fill color, maybe I don't want this kind of gray. Maybe I want to sample a color from my design. And maybe not that color, maybe something like that. Okay, so got the word menu there. Now for the rest of this page, I want to create a grid of stuff. And I want to have some guides to help me out. And it's very common that when we design, in all different types of design, whether it's print design or web design, app design, whatever it is, that we often work on a grid. A grid just helps you to keep consistent alignment, consistent spacing. It's not something that designers have to use, but it's something that many designers do like to use. So when I select the artboard by clicking on its name, there's a grid that we can add here. And I want to do the layout grid. I don't want like a graph paper style grid. I want a column based layout here. And for mobile phones, we don't really need a lot of columns. Like for a phone like this, I'd probably be just doing 2 columns. and you can choose how much gutter is in between. I'd want a little more space than that, so I click into the gutter there and give myself a little bit more space. Maybe I go with like a nice round 30 pixels there. Then there's also the margins that are on the left and the right, which is the space on the left and the right. And maybe I want those to also be the same 30 as well, just so I have 30, 30, and 30 just to match. And yeah, that's kind of nice. We're not going to see those once, you know, the final thing is done. These are just guides, right? So I can turn this off and on here if I want. And I can also do that up in the view menu. I can hide the layout grid and show the layout grid there as well. This is something that's done artboard by artboard. So if you notice, my homepage did not get changed. I could have selected multiple artboards and done it at the same time. So like if I click on this one, shift click on this one, I could make these all the same. So 2, and then 30, and then 30. So I can make them the same all at the same time. But that's important that it's done differently from one artboard to another, because your desktop would have a different grid. Normally desktops have a 12-column grid, and tablets would also have 12 columns, but they would have different sizes, so the width would be different. So you can alter that based on your artboard size. So this is just a way so I can stay aligned here. And I want to bring in another, I want to create like a grid of images, you know, things that are on the menu, and maybe have like a label of what that particular dish is. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool and draw a rectangle here, and it snaps to that grid. And now I'm going to drop a photo onto that. So this is where going to your desktop and dragging and dropping in is going to be the best. So you create your rectangle, drag and drop your photo in, boom, because that's going to give you that option of sizing it up and down. Yes, you can still double click on it and choose a specific part that you want. Of course, that works. And once you don't need the grid anymore, you can go in and simply hide the grid once you've got that going, once you've got the layout going. But I need the grid for just a little bit more. I want to add some text down below. So I'm going to go to my type tool here, and I'm going to drag out some text. This, I want to define the width. So I don't want this to go too wide. You know, I don't want it to go into the next column. So I'm going to drag a width on this. And so this is some artichoke. And oh, that is way too big. So it's my menu text there. And these little tips will come up when you are using XD sometimes. So you can close those unless you want to learn more about those. I'm going to go back here to my font size and use my up and down arrow keys. Now, up and down arrows go 1 pixel at a time, but if you hold shift, it goes 10 pixels at a time. Go to something smaller, and maybe this text, this should probably be black or like a shade of gray. And this should be, let's say, yeah, I'll do centered, that's fine. You'd probably have, you know, more descriptive stuff here, but I'm just going to keep it generic here just to create this layout kind of quickly. Now, I want to make additional ones here, and I could manually do that. I could select these and option drag or alt drag on Windows, and then do that again for another row. But when you start to do that, if you make a change to one, like let's say you move it up or you left align it, it doesn't change any other ones. So if you want to be able to globally change all these, because pretty much it would be different photos, but the layout and the styling of all of these should be the same. Adobe XD has a really cool feature which they call repeat grid, which is this is what Adobe XD showed when they first launched with the very first version. And they called it the beta version of Adobe XD back then, and they were calling it Adobe Experience Design. Eventually, it just got shortened to XD, and it pretty much couldn't do anything. Like, it couldn't export a JPEG, it couldn't create a guide, it couldn't create a gradient, but it could do this, and everybody was just wowed. They're like, "Wow, that's such a cool feature." And none of the other apps have done something exactly like this. They have features that can do kind of something similar-ish, but never something quite just this easy to do. That you select like one thing that you want to make into rows or columns or both, and then you click repeat grid up here at the top right. So you click repeat grid, then you get these new handles that you could just pull out as many of these as you want, and as many of these as you want. And then you can go back to the space in between, and you can adjust the space between the rows. You can adjust the space between the columns, and it's just so quick and easy to bring that out and work with it. And I think now that I've done that, I can go ahead and hide the layout grid now that I've got that kind of lined up with the grid. So this is a group essentially. And within that group, it's a special like repeat grid group. Even the icon over here looks like a special repeat grid. And you can adjust things easily, but here's the nice thing. You can throw other photos onto there. So I can go back to my desktop, and that is arugula here, so I can drag in arugula, and it goes through, and of course you can have different photos, and the text can be different too. So this is actually arugula pizza, and the artichoke was roasted artichoke. And so you can go in, you can adjust the text, and what's nice is the content can vary, but the styling can't. So once you start to edit the size, the alignment, any of those sort of things, that's going to update across all of those instances. Maybe you don't like that particular font for this. You want something a little more simple. Let's just go to Arial, and just so you can kind of see that working there. And yeah, it updates across every single place, which is pretty sweet. And you can still go back and, of course, adjust your rows. My artboard's a little too small now for this, so I'm going to click on my artboard name, and that way I can pull my artboard taller so I can see more of these. And you can just continue dragging on the additional things that you want to bring in. So let's say I bring in asparagus. It's called 4A Cafe because everything on the menu has one of the 4A ingredients: artichoke, arugula, asparagus, or avocado. It doesn't have to have all four. That would be an interesting dish. It can have any one of those. So you can throw it on there, and what it does is it just starts to repeat. Like now you have 3 photos, it repeats those 3 photos. So if you're just in preliminary design stages, just really quickly cranking out something for like a wireframe or something, and you just want some placeholder stuff in there, you can just quickly throw it in, and like you have something that somewhat feels real, even though some of them repeat. But if you have enough of these, then you don't actually have to see it repeating, of course. And you can just go in there and throw these photos in there, and eventually you'll have enough of them that there's no actual repeating, unless you create even more of them, because eventually those will be the first ones that repeat. And because it is called a repeat grid. And then you can put in all your text. So, whatever these different things were, I forget the exact ones, whatever those, oh, that was asparagus, right? So let's call it that. I forget what that was, but double click. So to get in here, you double click to get in, double click on the text, and then you can either type or copy and paste your text into there. Okay. Now, when it comes to the size of these boxes here, you want to make sure in this case that you choose auto height for this, because you want the height of these boxes to automatically be adjusted. And here we go. All right. So I've got my base layout done here, and I don't have a way to get to the menu page. I want to create a button over here on the home page. Of course, you'd put more content on here, but just going over the basic stuff here. I want a way to get to the next page. So there'd be some place on here where it would say go to, or like view the menu, right? And make that bigger here, like so. Okay. So how do I get somebody from here to over here, and that a client can actually open up the site, view the home page, click on view menu to go view the menu, and scroll up and down to see that menu? Okay, so how do I do that? That is prototyping. So XD has a kind of 3-stage process. Up here at the top left, there are tabs for the 3 stages of the design process: design, then prototyping, and then sharing. So we started out in the design tab. Now we switch over to prototype, And some of the tools go away because you don't need all of those same tools, like when you're designing, creating all those elements. When you're in prototype mode, you will get these circular buttons on the right with a little arrow for you to tell it where you want that to take you. So I'm going to click on this button here, take me, and I'm going to drag it over here, and that builds a link. So when I tap, which means click or tap on a mobile phone, it's going to transition to that menu artboard. And what's the animation going to be? They don't have too many animations here, but let's do a little slide left. That's kind of a fun one there. Just kind of more app-like. I know technically in a web page you wouldn't have an animation, but let's just do an animation just so you can see what the animation looks like. And there we go. So that's done, but how do I see it work? Well, there's a play button up here at the top right, and that is your desktop preview. So I can click on that button, which will open up a preview window. And this floating preview window here, I can interact with this, and I can click, and I can go. And there was a little bit of a stutter there. Here, let me do that again. There we go. So click and go. I can use my arrow keys, my left and right arrow keys, to switch between the artboards. If I don't have anything hooked up, I can still switch between those artboards. But assuming that you have buttons that you can click and that slides left to come in. So if you want, you can keep that open and do stuff like if I click on an artboard, it's going to load that up into the preview, and you can see, as you're doing this, if you make any changes, you can still go and click and interact with it. You can leave that open if you want, but if you're done with it, you close it up. You can always open it back up again in the desktop preview button right there. So you would design a bunch of different artboards. You would then prototype them and kind of link them together. And there's actually quite a number of different prototyping actions that you can do. You can do, just to show you the list here, you can tap on things, you can do drag interactions, you can assign keystrokes, or if you're doing game design, if you plug in a USB gamepad, or I don't know if they have Bluetooth ones too, but if you have a gamepad connected somehow, you can set gamepad buttons like the top left or top right, or the X or the square button. You can do voice interactions. So there's a bunch of different interactions that you can do, and also different types of things you can do, like show an overlay. You can scroll up and down. You can play audio. So a bunch of different things. You can make links. So a lot of things you can do here in XD. But in terms of the workflow, so we've designed, we've prototyped, and then the final step would be to share. So right now, only I can see this. And actually, before we share this, let me step back just a second. So I've never saved this file, so we should actually save this file. When I save it, there's 2 saves, and there's also 2 opens. And that's because with Adobe XD, you can save and open local files, which are open from your computer and save as a local document, or you can save as cloud files. So when you do save as, or you do a regular open, those assume that you want to be working in the cloud. And Adobe XD has more features for cloud documents. Think of Google Docs. When you're working in Google Docs, lots of people can be collaborating at the same time. Now, with Google Docs, it's a website. You're working in a website. Adobe XD is not a website, but it still syncs, still uses the internet to allow live collaboration, real-time collaboration. It didn't used to be able to do that, but for quite some time now, it's been able to do that. So, but XD gives you a choice. You can save locally, and for some companies, for certain niches, they have to do that. Like, for example, pharmaceutical and legal, they might not be able to save their files on somebody else's servers. And when you save as a cloud document, that does use Adobe servers. For the vast majority of people, they don't have that issue. So for most people, they're going to choose to save it as a cloud document because you're going to get that live collaboration when it's a cloud document. That can't work for a local file because a local file is stored solely on your computer. It's not accessible to other people. For everybody to be able to work on a document, it has to be a cloud file. So that's why XD is really pushing towards cloud documents, because they are the most feature-rich type of document. You could do more with a cloud document than you can with a local file, mainly because of the collaboration, and also it does keep document history as well. So for most people, they want that collaboration, especially with more people working remotely. Collaboration has really become important. So if I save as local document, you're going to be prompted where on your computer you want to save it. You're not going to get online collaboration with a local file, but you have that option. If you save it as a local file, to open it, you have to go open from your computer, which is different than the normal open. I'm going to choose to save it as a cloud file. So I'm going to do save as, and save it as, and I give it a name. It's technically already there, it just hasn't been named. And I'm going to call this, so for a cafe. All right, now that uploads and kind of syncs to the Creative Cloud. In the future, if I want to open that, then I would do a normal open, because open from your computer would go to your local computer, wondering where you saved it locally. This is in my Creative Cloud account, so I can, of course, I can click the recent file there, but let's pretend that it's not there. You want to see all your files, you can go to File Open, and this is going to show your cloud files. They do also have a little button here just in case you hit File Open and you're like, hey, why can't I get to my computer? There is a switch to your computer button, but assuming that you've saved it to the Creative Cloud, you click on it and it loads it from the Creative Cloud. And these types of documents you can add collaborators to by going up here at the top right. There is an invite to document. So when you invite people to the document, this is where you can put in another Creative Cloud user's email account, put in their email, invite them, and then kind of like Google Docs where everybody's working at the same time, you can all live collaborate on a document all at the same time because this is a cloud file. So we design, we prototype, and then we share. Because once we're done with our design, we need to show this to a client or we hand it off to a developer. Because Adobe XD, again, does not produce code. Like, they will give you little code snippets, little code hints to kind of help you out. But developers, they know how to code. So we hand it off to a developer and they're supposed to know the code of how to turn something into an app or a website. The reason that design apps aren't good at writing code is because there's so many different ways that you could build things. Like for websites, you could use WordPress, you could do Ruby on Rails, you could use JavaScript, you could use the MERN stack for the backend. Like how you build a website, there's so many different ways, and they have no idea how you'd want to do it. What's going to be front end? What's going to be back end? Are you using React? Are you not? It's too complex for a design app to produce good quality code. So all that Adobe XD is going to do is say, hey, we're a design app, right? And this is the same way that Figma works, the same way that Sketch works. We design here, we don't produce code here. Now, we do want to show developers and clients what our design looks like. So that's what the sharing part does. The link over here, that's just going to be the name of the link here. And what do we want them to see? If you're just getting feedback, you can do a design review. And let me show you that, and I'll show you a couple of the other ones in. And you can limit if you want to say, okay, well, let's put a password on this, so only people that know the password can access it. Or you can invite people and create links for just those specific people. But I'm going to say anybody with the link can view this. And when I create that link, it just prepares the file, makes that link, and this is going to be a link that you can send anybody, and they can open up in a browser and view it. They don't need to have Adobe XD. You send this link, you can click the little copy link button there, but if you want to open up and see it yourself, you can click on that. I'm going to actually copy that and just go to my browser here, paste it into here. And this is what it would look like for a client to review this, or you can also do user testing, although this is for design feedback. So there's another thing that would be more focused on user testing. And so notice a comment panel opens up. So if the client wants to make a comment, they can make a comment and say, like what else is going on this page? Because there's not much on the page. And they could submit that comment. Now this is where they can either create an Adobe account for free so that you can have a free Adobe ID, or what's nice is you can actually just sign in as a guest. So, so they could be a John Doe, and they don't have to make an account, which is actually kind of nice, because a lot of other apps like Sketch and Figma, they require you to have an account with them to make a comment. Like, you can't just guest comment. So that's kind of a nice thing that XD allows you to just create guest comments on that. And but they can click through, they can see the additional stuff, go back and forth between the artboards, give you feedback in the design, and then you'll be notified through your Creative Cloud app. So actually, I got a little notification here through my Creative Cloud app that somebody made a comment on my design, and so then I could go check it out and see what they have commented. Where, like, they might have pinned it to a specific place, so I can go look at their comment. So this is for design review, and there's actually a little grid up here that you can click to kind of see all the artboards and view it. But there are different types of sharing that you can do. For example, you could do one for development. So this would be good for the developer. Clients can actually view this too. So you might actually just want to do this for everybody. It would add the ability for developers to have the same link as clients. It just, what that'll do is, if you notice over here, there's only one little panel that you can open and close for comments. The share for development is going to add another panel over there. If you've actually marked any image assets for export, which I haven't talked about yet, but if you did, you could choose how you want to export graphics. Is this a website? Is it an app? For iOS or Android, it'll actually prep your graphics if you've marked those for export. And so let's see what a development link would look like. Let's update that link. All right, and I believe that's still the same link. Yeah, I just updated it, so let's just hit refresh. And now we're going to have another panel over here, actually two more panels. And so here we get some specs as well as code. Oh no, those are design variables, sorry. So we want the specs. So the specs here, this is the cool part. So let's say you click on some text, right? So here you get your font, your size, your color, and this is where XD doesn't really know how to code everything. But again, neither does Figma, neither does Sketch, but they know that some of these things might be useful. Like, do I care about the top and left position as a developer? Do I care about width and height? No, not for text. Absolutely not. Don't care about that. But I do care about like text alignment, color. If there was letter spacing on there, I would care about those. I'd care about the font, the line height. Those things I would care about. So any of the things that I am concerned with, actually the content itself too. I click to copy the content, paste it into my code. I can go and copy any of the things that are relevant that I need, and I can code it myself. And so in the commenting view, this is where you can actually go through and like interact with the prototype. But once you're in the kind of developer view, the view specs, this is where you can click on things, and you can click on one thing, hover over another, and see like, oh, there's 30 pixels of space in between those, because as a developer, I need to know how much space is between these things. And maybe I need to know how big it is, and so it tells me the width and the height. Those are useful things. Am I going to use left and top? No, normally I'm never going to use that as a developer, but that's where the developer has a certain way that they're going to want to work, and this gives them access to all that they need to know. The font, the size, the color, the space between things. You can click on one thing, hover over another, click on here and hover over the space, above or below that. See how big something is, right? So this is what a developer can go through and look at, and they have to know how to write code for an iOS app or an Android app or a website, but they can use the specs here. Here's the colors that were used in my design. And actually when I hover over, it'll even highlight it out there to show you what is using that color. This is what they would use to then build the website, to build the app using that share link. And they can also, the developer can give feedback as well, in addition to the client. So that's kind of the three-step process. And if at any point you need to go back and update your design, of course you can do that. You can go back to your design. Let's say they don't like the color. So you go in and choose, a completely different color. Like maybe they want green instead. So, You go in there, choose a green, and let's say that's the color you like. If you want to update that link, you go back to share and you update the link. So once you like the design, you choose to push out that update and update that link. And then clients with that same link can hit refresh and get the latest version of that when you choose to update that. Somebody in the chat is saying I don't have CSS code on my dev view. Is that because my XD is older? When you're in the share tab here, now a very long time ago it couldn't. Well, actually, I'm trying to remember. The code view, it's been there a really, really long time. So, I mean, I can't remember how old it would have to be for it to not have that. But make sure you choose to switch because it defaults to design view. And if you have it on design review, then it's not going to have that. So you have to switch it to either development or some sharing option that has that on it. Like if you go to customize, you can choose what you want to see. Like, do you want to allow people to have comments? Do you want to include those design specs? That's what those things are called, is the design specs. So it's possible that maybe when you did a share, you shared it for design review, which doesn't have that tab. And if you go back in, switch it to development, and then update the link, then it should have that little tab on the right there. Yeah. All right, so that is the kind of 3-step process that you can go through here, and kind of a nice high-level overview of what Adobe XD does. Let's pop back into my presentation and wrap this up with just a couple of things like Adobe XD compared to Figma and Sketch. I'm going to just go over this just pretty quickly, just so you get a high-level overview of this. I actually have another webinar that I'm going to be giving, or depending on if you're watching the recording of this, that I might have already given. If you click that link, you'll go check out that webinar. And I'm going to go in much more detail in comparing these apps. But on a high level, let's compare it to Sketch. Sketch is good. It was pretty much the first one. It came out 6 years before Adobe XD, so it had a head start in getting more users. So a lot of people are using Sketch. Adobe XD is trying to play catch up. That said, lately their development has slowed and they've just not kept up with the speed of improvements in either Adobe XD or Figma. So in terms of features, XD and Figma are far ahead compared to Sketch. Sketch, I like it as an app, but I just wish it had more features, specifically in prototyping. It barely has any prototyping features. It has very basic prototyping. They added it once and they haven't revisited it ever since, and it's been well over a year since they've done that. And all it can do is basically go from one artboard to another, and it can't do overlays. It can't do so many different things with prototyping. It also does not have animation, so it's lagging behind development compared to Adobe XD and Figma, which is it's sad to me because it was the first of these apps that I started with, because it was out for a lot longer, and clearly XD and Figma have been a lot inspired by Sketch. Sketch kind of paved the way in this new style of design. Now, if you need more prototyping, there is a plugin called Craft by InVision. It's more powerful than Sketch's native prototyping, but it's not as integrated. I mean, it's integrated to some extent, but you can't do everything in Sketch. Sometimes you have to go to the website to do it. It also costs extra. So Sketch is just kind of falling behind, and it has a head start in terms of how many users are using it. But I think once people realize, if they switch from Sketch to Adobe XD or Figma, I think they're going to realize that there's a lot more that XD and Figma have to offer. Also, Sketch is Mac only, which isn't a problem for a lot of designers, but not everybody works on Mac, and especially companies that need to work on Mac and PC, that can be a limitation. Both XD and Figma work fine on both Mac and PC. So now with Figma is a great app, and it's really solid competition for Adobe XD. It's a very good app, and they have a free starter plan, just like supposedly Adobe XD has a free starter plan that they hide. Figma doesn't hide theirs at all, and it's really good. It gets a lot of people using it. You can do quite a lot with their free plan. Now, a lot of people are going to hit some limits and want to pay for Figma, but there's a lot of people that can get by with just the free version of Figma, and you can do quite a lot. Once you do start paying, it actually is more expensive than Adobe XD, but but they have a better starter plan for free. So a lot of people are like, Figma's free. I'm like, they have a good starter plan. They have a good free plan, but don't always say that Figma's free, because there's a lot of people that will have to pay for Figma, and then it gets a bit more expensive. I do think that XD is a bit easier to understand and easier to use when you first get started. At least that's my personal opinion, but Figma's feature set is very good. I don't quite like its interface as much, and the keyboard shortcuts are weird because it's a web app. So there's certain things I don't like about it as much, but it's got a really good feature set, and that's hard to compete with. Now Adobe XD, it does compete pretty well, but Figma does have a really robust feature set. So to me, it's a Figma versus XD in terms of features, and Sketch is falling behind. So Adobe XD, it does integrate with Creative Cloud, which has some advantages, like opening Photoshop files, Illustrator files. You can export to After Effects. You get all your Creative Cloud fonts. Also, if you have Creative Cloud already, XD is free. And so, so there's definitely advantages there. And there's certain things where XD is better than Figma, and certain things where Figma is better than Adobe XD. So really, to me, in terms of features, it's Figma versus XD. Like, those are the two front runners in terms of capabilities. And so to me, Figma is the app that XD needs to beat if they're going to gain more users. And but Figma and XD were both released around the same time, just within a few months of each other. And to me, in terms of features, they're the front runners. And so, but Sketch has a lot of users just because they had a head start. All of them are good. It's not that any of them are bad, but especially if you need prototyping features, you really want XD or Figma in terms of prototyping features, because they both do prototyping and animation, and Sketch just doesn't really do much. Like, if you're okay with very basic prototyping, Sketch can work, but it does very basic prototyping. It really doesn't do a whole lot. So really, it's at this point when companies are using it, one of these, a lot of them, it's whichever one they decided to go with, and they might have switched to Sketch early, but I kind of feel like at some point, if they start looking around and realizing that the competition is better, like that XD and Figma are better, they might start to wonder, hey, maybe this is the time to switch to something else. So, but in terms of the amount of people using it, I think from what I've seen, XD has the smallest user base. Just I'm seeing more job applications requiring either Sketch or Figma. But so I think it's unusual for Adobe to have to try to play catch up. Adobe's kind of owned the design space for so long, but with XD they came out kind of late and play catch up, and it's definitely a solid app, but so is Figma too. So they're having to really try to compete with Figma, and I just wonder how long it's going to take for people that are using Sketch to wake up and say, hey, there's better things there with Adobe XD or Figma that we can be using. So that's for me, that's kind of the situation there. If you want to learn more with us, we have classes we teach Adobe XD, we teach Figma, we teach Sketch, we teach all of these, and you can take a class with us. Our classes are available either in person in New York City, which is where we're located, or you can do it live online. We use Zoom. You can screen share into the instructor's computer, hear them talking, see all the demonstrations, go through all the exercises and everything. But we teach Adobe XD. We teach things like web design, UI or visual design, things like creating web pages. We actually teach people how to create web pages, like code them if you want to learn coding, or you can learn the design aspect of it, and also UX design as well. So you can check out our various classes and certificate programs through these links down here. As far as this presentation, just a reminder that this presentation link is down in the video description down below. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar and that you've gotten a lot out of it, and hope to see you in a future one. Thank you so much, everybody.